So I think someone is going to play my video for me, and I will come in and talk over the top of it in the last 3 minutes. So yeah, that was by way of introduction what I'll be talking about, not just that film, but the kind of films that some of you might be familiar with about how properties, and often luxury properties, are kind of marketed to men, always to men. And I'm really interested, this invite gave me an opportunity to look at them and think about them with a romantic lens and see how romance is kind of folded into these narratives and dramas and marketing structures, devices, which, are not new marketing devices going back for hundreds of years. But see how they fold into like views of the city, literally, but also how these places are kind of imagined as parts of the city or parts of the self or parts of a romantic heterosexual coupledom. So I'll leave some playing in the background and occasionally I'll stop talking to listen in, but some of these motifs in this video recur a lot. There's a lot of sensuality and touching of things. There's a lot of coffee, like more coffee than you can imagine. In fact, you'd think you were buying coffee rather than a flat if at the end of one of these adverts. There's often a motif of like a city symphony-like motif of like the morning to the evening. The city symphony, which saw the cities wake up and go through the mechanics and the processes of the day before the end of the day when the city kind of winds down again. So it's the same motif you get here, but the house is central rather than the city. You get a lot of other capitalist fetishized objects of purchase like cars and electronic goods. You get a lot of kind of women in sexy lingerie type clothing like this. And the men always go to work in a high-powered suit, driving off somewhere into that distant city. I think this one's Vancouver, to do something very important in a meeting. While the women stay at home, they might go jogging, do some yoga. Sometimes they paint a picture. They always chop some fruit, ready for when the husband's coming back from work. When there's also a glass of wine readily waiting for the husband. And then they sit down, usually to eat something very different to what was being prepared in the montage you watched before. So yeah, there's this very heteronormative structure set up already, and ideas of I'm interested in this idea of the sanctuary, the home, and the city. And so sometimes you go into the city, like here, but it's only for this excursion. You always end up jogging back to the home, and the home is this sort of the place which is not only the place of security, which touches on what was being talked about earlier by Louise, but also a place of kind of part of the romantic relationship you have with the city and your partner, who's now home from work, because remember he's got a nice smart car, so that was to remind us he's going to choose which bottle of wine to have tonight. And something else, a motif of more technology, something else that always happens in these films is as the sun sets, you'll have your glass of wine. See, she was chopping strawberries and now they're eating vegetables. I don't understand what's going on there. Women have a lot of baths and they often go to pools just to sit by them. Men rarely have baths or go swimming in these films because they're in the suit all the time. So often as the sun sets, you will then drift back to the balcony with a view of the city, which I'll touch on a bit later in the talk. So he's even working from home. He just loves his work, this guy. I mean, a lot of wine. When the sun sets, the coffee turns into wine. So you get these kind of different relationships of imbibing and sort of sensuality to a place. And you always end up here, whether the fireworks are kind of a symbolic, suggestive phrase like the pan to the fireplace in a film. I'm not sure. But they're always very heteronormative. And it's always where property is bound up with sort of capitalism and luxury. And it's always romance as a private act as well. So rarely do you see eyes meet over a marketplace or in the bookshop, which was we talked about earlier. You know, one of these great things of the cities and even of capitalism, if you're talking about adverts, is bookshops and the places where people of different classes and backgrounds can meet, and you can do those things of pulling a book out of a shelf and seeing someone's eyes the other side. But you never get that. The romance in these stories always has to come back to the house, the fetishized object, and always being with someone who's very like-minded to you. So not the accidental urban encounter where you then might discover someone, but it's someone who it's safe. Oh, look, she's getting the dinner. He's a bit tired, waiting. View of the city, candlelit dinner. They're probably going to head to their balcony in a moment. And it's always heterosexual because you have to think these are being marketed at the men, these adverts. These are being marketed at usually the men in the suits with the flashy cars. And the wife kind of, or the romantic institution and the wife comes as part of that purchasing package. You get the house, you get the car, you get the suit. This is the only instance I found of a homosexual hint in any advert I've seen, so I'll just leave it to play.
What we choose to seek.
And it's fleeting.
How we spend our time. And of course, who we spend our time with. In a city so vibrant, so creative, it's not a question of if, but how you will be inspired. Whether across the table or across the river, you can't escape that feeling. That is New York.
So we're going to jump into briefly some pictures which were kindly Crystal Benez, who's a researcher and architect, writer, let me use. And she's really interested in what she calls aesthetic development images. And these couples, these, quite toxic looking, and when they're put onto hoardings rather than in the adverts like that, they're really in the face of the people that are often being dispossessed. And I think they're quite violent, these acts of hoardings. But this idea of using something romantic and sublime and sort of enticing and often alluring as something which is quite an aggressive act of demolishing social housing estates to build this kind of luxury, to build this kind of lifestyle and these dreams. And then how, and even romance is a tax-efficient leasehold option, so romance is always here about money, and it's about being an original, about going out like a sort of so this is what I mean. So these touching in, what's romantic to one can be struck as the enemy to another. and how romance can easily go into what was hinted at earlier, sexiness as well.
It all
I will
started
leave this
in
one to play. This is absolutely terrifying.
her heart had been
More
set on a
terrifying than
beautiful
the films we
glass
saw
sculpture.
earlier.
London is like a living work of art, a fabulous landscape of remarkable monuments and bold new ideas. Steeped in history, lavished in culture, with excitement at every turn. I had everything planned from the moment we arrived. We began with a visit to some of those exclusive boutiques she loves so much. Well, I knew all the time her ultimate surprise was being prepared. What made it even better for me was having complete confidence in Harrod's concierge making preparations for the evening. All we had to do was enjoy the very best of London. In the afternoon, we indulged our love of art and culture at London's galleries and museums. It's hard to define what makes a day perfect. It can be the moment, or delighting in the anticipation of what's to come. Sometimes it's about knowing everything is as it should be, and of having a dream that is about to be realized where every meticulous detail has already been imagined, designed, and crafted. As we arrived at 1 Blackfriars, I explained that she was welcome to make herself feel at home while I slipped away. I'm here to acquire the sculpture she adores. Delicate, elegant, perfectly formed. Qualities that I know she appreciates as much as I do, and why I know my final surprise will be the best of them all. When something is right, you know it, you feel it. When something is right for you, then you have to make it yours. She was curious about my earlier absence and about what I planned for the evening. But you know, I think that maybe she'd guessed it already. After all, we share a passion for elegance, for design, for perfection in every detail. We both love beautiful things, and I purchased this river-facing apartment overlooking St. Paul's Cathedral because everything about 1 Blackfriars is exceptional. From the attention that has been lavished on the interior to the remarkable view of London's classic landscape. To every sensuous curve of this elegant building. 1 Blackfriars is London's latest masterpiece by St. George plc.
So I'm glad that you're all on mute, because otherwise there would be this cacophony of laughing, crying, vomiting, and screaming, I think. Yeah, it's really interesting. Like they do go into the city, like they use it as a selling point, and even the romantic parts of it, like, you know, going to Tate Modern and having that moment, and they say we love to experience the culture of London while standing in the turbine hall where there's absolutely nothing in that room. You know, there's just each other, or going in front of a Rothko, but they're not looking at the Rothko, they're just looking at one another. So they hint at this romance, and they say that sort of this romance has to be in that kind of place, but it's just a backdrop. I think someone mentioned earlier about the city being a backdrop for the romantic situation. Certainly this all comes up in Lily's comments earlier as well, that like this sort of the emptiness, they found these empty moments even in the city. Obviously there's another one playing in here in the background. They're universal, these kinds of videos. And it's also about a private exercise as well. So private in the sort of sense of the emotional, in proximity, in the personal, like that couple we saw in that really awful example. And also in the immediate, but now also in private and spatial terms as well. So they all refer to the city, but they kind of focus upon this purchasable object, the luxury flat, or the life is focused around it. And in this example, I think it's really worth watching, silently playing in the background, because all of the romantic spaces you need, all of the spatial situations to be romantic, that sort of Lily talked about, riverside walks and so on and so forth. You don't even need to go into the city in some examples, because kind of like as a resort kind of idea of being in London, they can all exist in one place. So in this particular building, you can go bowling, you can go to the pool, there's a bar, the lounge, the cinema, the swimming pool, sauna, you can be in nature, and you can be in the city from the balcony rooftop view as well, all within your own private bubble, where you're not going to be at risk from having to mix with people, from the crime that's down on the street below. Roland Atkinson, in his book Alpha City, How London Was Captured by the Super Rich, writes, London acts like a machine of forgetting for its disconnected, super affluent denizens. Looking down from penthouses and high-rise apartments may induce a kind of social vertigo, a fear of the apparent chaos and social disorganization. Any sense of common inhabitation, reciprocity and altruism is inoculated against by this kind of city life. And perhaps even romance doesn't need to be with other people in some instances. The next video we're going to see, and hopefully I can speak through it in a bit first, he's clearly in love with himself. It's quite a famous example, some of you might know, but it makes me think of Michel de Certeau when he wrote Walking in the City in 1980. And he talks about going up the World Trade Center. And he says, when one goes up there, the viewer leaves behind the mass that carries off and mixes up in itself and any identity of authors or spectations. His elevation transfigures him into a voyeur. It puts him at a distance. It transforms the bewitching world into one which was possessed, into a text that lies before one's eyes. It allows one to read it, to be a solar eye looking down like a god. And there's a lot of kind of this top looking down, which was referenced in Roland Atkinson's book, but also in Stephen Graham's Vertigo, which I'll do a quote from later, which is an excellent book, about this idea of owning the city, being high up. Views of the city as a backdrop for this kind of romance. The next one also, I think, we talked about horror films earlier. Some of you might know this next one. I will leave it to play. I think it's about 2 minutes long. And it is absolutely one of the scariest films that's ever been made in any genre. And the man is clearly having a romantic situation that possibly results. I think it also touches on.
They say nothing comes easy.
So.
And looking back, it's hard to disagree. The mornings that felt like night, the days that melted into months and years, the missed opportunities, the doubts, the need to be different, to define yourself, to be more than individual, to stay true to what you believe. Make the impossible possible. To rise and rise. Yes, they say nothing comes easy. But if it was easy, then it wouldn't feel as good. To look out at the city that could have swallowed you whole and say, I did this. To stand with the world at your feet.
So that kind of is the Yorkshire Ripper, the Patrick Bateman character. That video was pulled by the developer because everyone on the internet was just laughing at it. But it's this privileged perspective, just to wrap up, which I think is really a recurring theme that's worth thinking about in them. That powerful view from high up in the city, which kind of seamlessly melted into the romantic image, the very heterosexual, heteronormative romantic image. Stephen Graham writes in his book Vertical, which is really worth reading, all about height in the city. Culturally, the new vertical shift in urban housing is being tellingly coded. Their vertical ascent by the relatively new numbers of often absent owner-occupiers in the new elite housing towers is widely celebrated and marketed as the answer to all their narcissistic and anti-urban fantasies. The new towers are invariably marketed as luxury cocoons of uber wealth and fortress security that float serenely above the urban landscape. The wider city is usually rendered as a mere aesthetic backdrop of startling and expensive views. So it's about power mainly, and it's always about men and power and the fetish object, which could be the woman, could be the romantic object, could be the thing on the shelf, that sculpture or the building. And these films' romance may seem touching, but it's kind of delivered as an act of power, of possession and status and control. And I'm kind of interested in that marrying of narcissism, power and romance. And height as a security above the complex mess and danger of the city, where I think romance actually is encountered and accidentally happens. Where your possessions and love can be, you can stop the video now because it will accidentally go into some other things, just as I wrap up. As your possession and love can be sort of sacrosanct and protected. And I just wonder how strong a romance it is, this kind of romance, if it has to be safeguarded by this verticality, if it has to be packaged up in luxury gifts and secreted away into bubbles of private containment, instead of being let loose into the real city to kind of fend for itself and be resilient in the face of temptations, of chaos and seediness and ruin and people of different social structures. So I'll finish up there, but I think there's a few interesting parallels between everyone in this very eclectic mix of presentations we've had. Thank you.